Gospel of the Pantheon by Strauss. Chapter 1, Verse 3. Religeti was quite excited to see the new world and the endless sand in all directions, so he resolved to eat quickly. But upon entering the kitchen, and perhaps because he was feeling a little drunk, he became mesmerized by all of the foods. There were foods that looked like nothing he'd ever eaten before. There were foods he could not even muster a guess about what they might be, or how one might eat them. And, of course, there were many familiar foods as well. Copious sliced meats and cheeses of all kinds, and breads to match, and sausages, and what looked like some leftover stew. It took him 20 minutes just to do a very cursory inventory of his choices. In the end, he went with what he knew, and he piled meats and cheeses between two halves of a round loaf of bread. After some searching, he found mustard. And while looking for the mustard, he noticed a barrel of pickles, and he fished out 2 of those. He also found a pitcher of mead in the tall, cold box, and he grabbed that too, and he put the mead and his sandwich and the pickles on a small table in the corner of the kitchen. Everything was astonishingly good. This was, without question, the best food he had ever eaten, the best mead he had ever drunk. Not that he had many occasions to drink mead. The thin ale at the pub was more his price range. Regardless, he gorged. And when he was done, he reflected upon his good fortune at having seen the villa, and commended himself for having decided to enter it. This was proving to be the greatest day of his young life. He wondered if any of the other groundskeepers would believe him when he told them. Probably not, but so what? That wasn't going to stop him from enjoying himself while he was here. He rose from the table, and unsure what to do with his mess, he left it where it was. He recalled hearing that the house cleaned itself, so if anyone complained, this would be his excuse. He turned and walked toward the swiveling panel on the wall, but before re-entering the bar he turned to look again at the mess he had left, just to gauge how bad it looked from a distance. And, of course, the mess was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there at all. Back in the bar, Campago saw that 2 more men had joined Precreator and Accutron. One of them he recognized immediately. He was the god of time. He looked just like the pictures in the book his mother had shown him when he was small. Well, perhaps the beard was more gray than white, but it certainly was bushy. And while the god of time was not wearing a long white robe, he wore canvas pants and a cotton shirt, there was still no mistaking the guy. The other one was a rather mousy-looking fellow, with thinning hair and a bit of a slouch. "Ah, Campago, you've returned. I trust the food was to your liking," said Precreator. "It was the best food I've ever tasted, sir," replied Religeti honestly. "Good, good. Some introductions, then." He pointed to the mousy gentleman, whose face was slightly wrinkled, the mortals saw now. "This is Curtis, the god of text and of naming things. Curtis, this is Campago Religeti, from the dukedom of New Hamptonshire." At hearing the name of New Hamptonshire, Curtis's eyes widened, and he glanced at Precreator and at Accutron. Then he looked at the god of time, but that god was looking away. Curtis said nothing about it, though, and he stuck out his hand towards Campago. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Religeti." Campago shook the offered hand. "And this," said Precreator, indicating the bearded god, "is my old and dear friend, the god of time." Religeti shook his hand as well, and Precreator sighed heavily and said, "Well, let's get going then." The gods provided a saddled horse for Campago, and then they began walking away from the house and toward the far perimeter of the villa grounds. Though the gods appeared to be walking no faster than any mortal might walk, Religeti was forced to ride the horse hard across the unpredictable terrain just to keep up. As a consequence, this ride required all of the man's attention. Which meant that although it was a fairly substantial distance to travel, to Religeti it felt like it took hardly any time at all. Nevertheless, Campago was much relieved to see the gods stop and to have the chance to dismount. All the food and meat and bouncing and tension was making him queasy. He was much pleased to have his feet on solid ground again. And then Campago looked up. He saw the railing at the edge of the villa, and beyond it were red spires and blue sky and the yellow desert far below. "Accutron's hammer!" he exclaimed. The expression was popular in 1700, and elicited a small chuckle from Accutron when he heard Campago mutter it. "I have never seen any world such as this." He walked to the railing and leaned out to take it all in. Now, this would have struck most any observer as a rather unwise thing to do, For the railing did not just mark the edge of the villa grounds. It also coincided precisely with the edge of the plateau itself, and the drop to the hard, sun-baked clay below was 1,000 feet. But Relighetti, apparently, was not afraid of heights, because he leaned out as far as he could and peered down into the abyss below. Wow! There's no grass, no trees, no people or animals, only that red rock all around. He paused and turned to look at the gods who stood behind him. But where is all the sand? I told you, it's not that kind of desert, said Accutron. The god of time then walked to the railing, and he too leaned out of it, adding his weight to the equation. It is a beautiful world, isn't it, Relighetti? That's the god of time. Isn't this a beautiful world? Before Campago could reply, a loud cracking sound came from the railing. Relighetti jumped back to safety with the quick reflexes of the young. The god of time was not so quick, however, and when the section of railing split in two, the deity tumbled silently over the edge. Relighetti scrambled back to the railing, an unbroken section, and watched the god fall. It was several seconds until he saw a puff of red dust where the body hit the ground. He turned to look at the gods, then back at the ground, and at the gods again. Did you see that? Is he going to be okay? Abruptly, a new god appeared beside Pre-Creator, Accutron, and Curtis. The god of time is dead, said this god. Relighetti thought this new god was much more impressive than the others. This god was substantially taller and very broad-shouldered. He had a sweeping plume of shock-white hair above an ageless, square-jawed, serious face, and he clasped in one hand a very tall wooden staff. This new god pointed at Campago. This must be the man from New Hamptonshire, the one who killed the god of time. I. Pre-Creator interrupted Relighetti, stammering. Please leave us to our grief, Lord Alienator. Alienator stared hard at Pre-Creator for 3 seconds, but the latter god did not make eye contact with the former. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, High Lord Alienator was gone. I didn't kill him, blurted Relighetti. Of course you didn't, said Accutron. Your arrival simply coincided with the occasion of his death. Now, Campago Relighetti was young, and not very worldly for sure, but he was not a stupid man, and he put together the many obvious clues from his day with the gods, and realized something abruptly. Hey, you knew that we would die today, didn't you? Hey, you knew that he would die today, didn't you? Indeed we did, said Curtis. And Pre-Creator nodded confirmation. Well, why didn't you warn him to stand back then? Why didn't you save him? Asked Campago. But before he could receive any reply, a very beautiful woman appeared behind the other gods and walked to the front of the group. She was not a large woman, and she had light brown skin and long, light brown hair and a round face with dimples. Campago correctly identified her as Baby Lady Bay. The god of time is dead, she said. Yes, he fell over the edge right there, said Relighetti to the goddess, pointing to where the railing had broken. Baby Lady Bay looked up at Relighetti and offered him a very warm smile, and Campago was abruptly awash in love and warmth. The grace of her divinity was a palpable, pulsing sort of thing. Then she looked to her fellow gods, and her face went cold. You three knew about this. Why was I never told? I would have liked a chance to say my goodbyes. Curtis seemed just slightly flustered by the she-god's question. Oh, well, my dear, he said, you had not yet been elevated when we received the prophecy, and therefore it was not meant for you to know it, although I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that we would very much have liked to have told you. Accutron was less politic in his reply. You would have intervened to try to save him, most likely in vain, but still. Prophecy? Asked Campago. It's a form of meaning-smithing, and it's dirty business all around, said Curtis. Now, Campago had a pretty good idea what prophecy was, but, like most mortals, He had only a poor and largely incorrect understanding of what meaning-smithing was, so this comment was not very elucidating. Would you like us to tell it to you now? Asked Procurator of Baby Lady Bay. Baby Lady Bay looked none too pleased by this suggestion, but motioned for Procurator to proceed. The prophecy said, when the first man from New Hamptonshire visits the Villa of the Gods, he will watch the God of Time die, and he will collect the finger bones of the God of Time and put them in a sack. Which, added Curtis, means that we no more knew exactly how or when he would die than you did, Bay, if that's any consolation. Baby Lady Bay considered this for a moment. What exactly do you mean, the first man from New Hamptonshire? Is this gentleman the founder of New Hamptonshire? Or am I to understand that there is to be a second man? And a third, said Accutron. Yes, Lady Bay, said Curtis, there are 2 other parts to the prophecy. Well, 3 other parts, actually. Which are? She prompted. I'm afraid we can't tell you that, added Curtis. Yes, interrupted Baby Lady Bay. I wasn't a god yet when you heard the prophecies, but you see, now I know about the prophecies. I know there will be 2 more men from New Hamptonshire, so why not tell me the rest? Indeed, began Curtis, you do know the existence of the prophecies, and you do know that 2 more men from New Hamptonshire will play a role in fulfilling them, and therefore it is clearly acceptable for you to know those things. However, finished Procurator, we did not decide to tell you anything else about the prophecies. Therefore, it is clearly not acceptable for you to know those things. Then why not simply decide to tell me? Asked Baby Lady Bay. You know it doesn't work like that, answered Procurator. Baby Lady Bay glared at Procurator, and then she was gone. The remaining gods now turned to look at Campago. So, said Procurator, you have a job to do, Releghetti, and you'd best get to it. What job? Asked Campago. Weren't you listening? Asked Accutron. You have to go get the fingers of the God of Time. And put them in a sack, added Curtis. What, go down there? Asked Campago, indicating towards the edge. Just so, said Procurator. Can't you guys just, magic him back up here? Asked the mortal. Procurator looked to Curtis, who wrinkled his brow, and with a hate to tell you this expression, said, I'm afraid we must play this bull where it lies, so to speak. Certainly it would have been more convenient for all of us had he died back at the bar, but it didn't work out that way. Perhaps, Campago, if you had made the God of Time one of your drinks, joked Accutron. This prompted a chuckle from Procurator, but Releghetti felt only rising alarm of what the gods were telling him. But how am I supposed to get down there? He demanded. Here is a rope, said Accutron, and Campago saw that the god now held a long coiled rope in one hand. Now, leaning recklessly over the railing was one thing, but Releghetti had no desire to inch his way down 1,000 feet of rope. He scrambled to think of some sort of way to avoid this ordeal. But what if the rope breaks? I'll be killed! This rope won't break, assured Accutron. I made it myself. Well, you gods made that railing too, right? And we all know how sturdy that was. Interesting story, actually, answered Accutron. Yes, I constructed the villa and the grounds and all of the railing, but I did it before the awakening of the world, which means I didn't need to do all the work myself. It's a little bit complicated to explain, but you know how in the very beginning, before there was anything, there were the world and the people as always, and all the people did was work, and everything they made was perfect? Campago looked blankly at Accutron. That gospel has not yet been channeled, Accutron, said Curtis. There's no way this mortal could possibly know that. Ah, well, continued Accutron, that's how it was anyway. So, back before the awakening, I just directed the people, because I could be certain that the work would be done right, see? The problem is that the villa was completed at the dawning of the world, right as year 1 began, and the emoticons began crashing into the world just as the last of the railing was being made, this very section right here, in fact. So you see, this last bit right here was made by mortal hands after the very beginning, and the mortals channeled the truths of the article space
imperfectly. And thus the railing here, unlike this rope which I made entirely myself, was vulnerable to breakage.
Accutron paused and looked at the broken railing.
If you think about it, he continued, given the circumstances, it was inevitable that this bit of imperfect railing would play some significant role at some point, and as you see, it did.
None of this made sense to Campago, but he did get the gist of what it signified. He was going to have to climb down the rope, like it or not. Accutron walked to the railing some distance from the point where it had broken and began tying one end of the rope around the wood. This gave Campago a few moments to appreciate the spectacular woods that grew near the edge of the villa grounds and the small glen where stood Precreator and Curtis watching Accutron get the rope ready. The trees were enormous, and mostly of varieties that Relegati had never before seen. The beauty of the place easily rivaled that of the desert, but Campago had felt so thoroughly harried throughout the ride from the house to the railing that he really had not had a chance to see any of it. He looked far up towards the tops of the towering trees and was awed by them. He understood then that he was, indeed, in the home of the gods, in the presence of divinity.
"You'd best get started, I think," prompted Precreator.
"When you get to the bottom," said Curtis, "do not let go of the rope until you've collected all of the fingers of the god of time. As soon as you let go, you will be back in New Hamptonshire, as the rope is going to be the only thing keeping you connected to the villa." Campago nodded that he understood, and then said goodbye and shook the hand of each of the three gods in turn, and thanked them for their hospitality. Precreator handed the mortal a small canvas sack, which Campago carefully tied onto his belt, and kept it out of his way during the descent. Then Relegati climbed over the edge of the cliff and started inching down the rope. It took him the better part of 3 hours to reach the bottom. About halfway down, he realized that he had no way to cut the fingers off of the god of time, but he wasn't about to go back up now. He just had to find a sharp rock or something. When at last the mortal arrived at the bottom, however, he saw that the god had become nothing but bones, and that his clothes had become a few ancient shreds of cloth. In fact, Campago noted that remnants seemed to still be aging so quickly that he could watch it happening. He could see some of the bones literally decaying into nothing, and this, it occurred to the man, meant that he should probably hurry up. So, being careful not to release the rope, Relegati easily broke off each brittle finger in turn and placed it into the sack. He got the thumbs, too, just to be safe. Then, after a final gaze at the arid red land, and at the spot where the corpse of the god of time had been, it was now mostly just dust, Campago released the rope and found himself back in New Hamptonshire. Almost immediately after Campago's departure, another figure arrived at the spot of the god's demise. It was Intrapatripocles. The god of stumbles and confusion got down on all fours and pawed through the dust until he found what he was looking for. End of Chapter 1 of Gospel of the Pantheon by Eric D. Strauss, copyright 2006. Thanks for watching Talking with the Fantasy People.